Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Regarding Men with Paul Elam, Janice Fiamengo, and myself, Tom Golden. And today we're going to talk about something that has a lot of angles to it. It's a sad situation where Carolyn Flack, she was the host of a program called Love Island in Great Britain, which apparently was really, really popular. And it was Love Island was about having, I think, four couples come into the island, and people would vote then on which couple was the cutest, and the couple that got the least votes would be out for that week or something like that. So it's one of those reality show kinds of things.
Something very profound.
I'm telling you, she was a beloved host of that. People loved this woman apparently, and she was pretty talented from what I've been able to see. But there happened December the 12th, I think, at 5:25 a.m. A fellow named Lewis Burton, who's 27 years old, who was her boyfriend, called the police and said that he had been assaulted by Miss Flack in his sleep. And apparently what came out later was she hit him with a lamp in the head. So not good. The police came, they came to the place, and they found both were bloodied. She had blood all over, apparently, with a cut to her wrist, which she said was there when she cut herself on a wine glass. I've heard that one before. At any rate, so she's bloodied, he's bloodied, and she apparently admits to some sort of connection with the incident, but I'm not sure exactly what. But the police had police cams on at the time. They recorded this whole thing, their interaction with both of them. And they charged her with domestic assault. Okay. And since that time, that was December, I think in the past couple of weeks, the guy, the boyfriend, said, "Oh, no, it was all a mistake. Let's just forget the whole thing." And the cop said, no, we're not going to forget the whole thing. And so the whole time the media is tearing her up, right? I mean, the media is saying really nasty things like, "This is not Carolyn Flack, this is Carolyn Smack." Mm-hmm. and another company put out this, or it was a newspaper put out a Valentine of, "I'm going to fucking lamp you," for, it was like just nasty, typical nasty media stuff. Yeah. And apparently Miss Flack was pretty affected by this kind of thing. And she told the police, "If this goes to court, I'm going to commit suicide." Now that brings up an interesting question in itself. What do you do, if you're the police and someone says they're going to commit suicide, if you follow through on what you need to do? I mean, that's one question we can have a look at today, but there's more questions than that. And one of the ones I find particularly interesting is that with domestic violence, let me read you a quote from this article. Data showed that intimate partner abuse played a role in 2,031 male and 439 female suicides across all age groups. That's from the CDC, apparently. So domestic abuse is involved in suicide. Now, I kind of knew that part, but the part I didn't know was that domestic abuse is involved in suicides such that people who are the perpetrators suicide more often than people who are the victims. Isn't that interesting? And this holds true for both men and women. And so, what the heck? I mean, in some ways, it could be expected that she would commit suicide if she was indeed the perpetrator. I think the men's percentage is 4% of the domestic suicides. I'm sorry, let me read you the actual quote. That'll make it better. Although occurring in only, and this is from the CDC, although occurring only in a limited percentage of cases, being a perpetrator of interpersonal violence in the month before the death was more common among male suicide decedents, 4%, than being a victim of such violence, 0.3%. Whereas the proportions were similar for females, and for females it was 1.4% were the perpetrators and 1.1% were the victims. So that's another interesting piece of this, is if the police are going to start changing their ways, they really need to start thinking about the males who are the perpetrators as far as suicide goes. But of course, we all know that gynocentrism is rearing its ugly head with all of this. And it's saying, oh, poor Caroline. You know, they juiced her up for a month, and now everyone's going, oh, poor thing. But guess what? You know, we've got this gorgeous genetic treasure, right, who is apparently a perpetrator. And I think that creates cognitive dissonance in people. They don't know what to do with that. They have no idea what to do with it. And so what do? They find a way to make her the victim. So of course, she's the victim of those nasty police who charged her, even though the boyfriend said, that's bullshit. But guess what? That's been going on in the United States for how many, for decades, is A, mandatory arrest, and B, even if the victim says, no, it was all a mistake, they prosecute anyway. So in some ways, I think they're getting a taste of the medicine that the men in this culture have been eating for the last 10 or 15 years. So what do you guys think about all this? It's a fascinating mess, and it has a lot to do with men and what we are about. What do you guys think?
Well, I think that, one, it's interesting to me, and it makes me wonder, had this woman been a man, would we have even seen it in the news?
No.
Or would there be a discussion? I know that the police were taking extra precautions with their investigation in this, trying to cover their asses in this, as though they're worried about being culpable. And of course, if a man had committed suicide, the police wouldn't give a damn about covering their asses.
Exactly.
They wouldn't need to. Really the only thing that this story does for me is it provides an example of the difference in reaction when the sex changes in any given situation.
Yes.
I went through, for instance, her suicide note. One, I want to say, obviously, and I think with Tom, with the statistics that you cited, we don't really have a causal relationship between domestic violence and suicide. We've got certainly a correlation to some degree, but nothing approaching a causal relationship. And I would think that a lot of these are already, mentally challenged people, emotionally challenged people going through hard times. I read through Ms. Flack's suicide note, and it reeked of a personality disorder to me. It was absolutely zero accountability, saying on one hand, I'm sorry, but it was an accident. Well, we don't apologize for accidents.
Accident that lamp hit his head.
Yeah, it accidentally hit his head. And she also turned the situation, even in her suicide note, to make her the victim.
Yes.
That this was an accident, and I'm ruined now. And I get that. I mean, I think with some more emotional stability, she would have recognized that this particular society would have eventually forgiven her. I mean, look at Hope. What was her name? The
Hope Solo.
Hope Solo commits domestic violence, and ends up lionized and in positions of authority. There wasn't the destruction. This woman overly dramatized this whole thing. It looked like certainly there was some emotional upheaval in the relationship that she was having with a guy that was 13 years her junior. But I'm looking at this now, and what I see is, okay, we had a domestic violence situation, and this woman, as opposed to Tom read the numbers, if we want to talk about people committing suicide, if it is in relation to that, it's much more overwhelmingly male, but of course, there's no news stories about that. So here we are discussing her.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it does raise all those issues that you've both articulated so eloquently. Here's the law of unintended consequences. At one point, I was reading an article that mentioned that the former Crown Prosecution Service chief prosecutor stated that the CPS was under pressure to pursue convictions for domestic violence
Right.
amid concerns that too many prosecutions were dropped.
That's
Well,
right.
gee, I wonder who was putting all that pressure on the CPS to keep pursuing these prosecutions, even when in cases where the alleged victim said, please don't go ahead with it, let's just drop it. And they still do with these, I think they call it evidence-led prosecutions. Well, we know who's doing it. It's the feminist MPs, it's the feminist barristers, the very people who are now coming forward to say that this is a terrible tragedy that Carolyn Flack was led to take her life. And
Exactly.
so, yes, this has been going on, and our wonderful friend William Collins has a fantastic post on his Empathy Gap website that
Yes.
I encourage everybody to read, where he talks about how this has overwhelmingly affected men. He's done a study of false allegations, mostly having to do with sexual assault, and the number of men, there's a couple women too, a mother of a falsely accused man, the number of men who have committed suicide or in fact been killed in homicides as a result of false allegations. So these are cases where the men were clearly innocent, but he said even in cases where it seems likely that the accused was guilty, yes, suicide is quite prevalent. He found a higher percentage than the ones that you found from the CDC, Tom. I think he found 8%, something like that. So, and so this is a real issue. He also found that it seems as if perhaps the correlation or causation works the other way too, that suicidal ideation may actually play a role in causing domestic violence as well as the other way around. So if we're concerned about all of these issues, if we are genuinely concerned about suicide and domestic violence, we should be concerned with depression and anxiety and mental illness in both men and women. But the fact is that we're only concerned, it seems, when it's a woman who ends up dead. He found, he did investigation mainly over the last I think since 2013, and he found 16 cases of men ending up dead as a result of false allegations. And how much public brouhaha and worry was there over that? And did the Charlotte Proudmans of the world stand up and say that it was a terrible thing that these people were shamed and demonized in the press and had their lives destroyed? No, they didn't. So
you hear nothing.
Yeah. So certainly this is an issue that affects men and that doesn't get talked about or worried about very much at all.
Yes.
It does also raise the question about the appetite of the Crown to pursue, or indeed, in the United States, of prosecution, chief prosecutors to pursue these cases when they really don't seem to be cases that that anybody necessarily needs to have pursued. Why is it? Is this really the best way to go? I don't know what you guys think about this, but I mean, I posted this on Twitter in relation to the Carolyn Flack case, and I got a lot of pushback about it. And I know it's a really kind of controversial thing to say, that I really don't think that a lot of cases of domestic violence are usefully criminalized at all. And I know that's difficult because where do you draw the line? Obviously, there are very serious cases that need to be criminalized, and what would be the effect of decriminalizing domestic violence. But lives destroyed for what? Is there another way that this problem in families, and especially amongst couples, can be dealt with that doesn't involve ruining people's lives in this way?
Amen.
I think there is. Absolutely. I mean, I'll go ahead and say it. I think that domestic violence that doesn't result in life-threatening injuries, if we're talking about minor injuries, bruises, scrapes, that sort of thing, I would decriminalize all of it and keep the state out of people's relationships. I never understood why we thought if a husband and wife, we do know for the most part, when couples get physical, it's mutual. That's what it is. That's the typical case.
Right.
And how can you expect to go in with state functionaries and manage a relationship, something as nuanced and complicated between two people, and intervene in that relationship criminally and expect anything but bad things to come. We saw this all the time, in Houston, or way back in the day, Warren Moon, our great star quarterback of the Houston Oilers, was accused of domestic violence. His wife wanted to drop the whole thing. They said they had a fight. Nobody was really hurt. It wasn't a big deal. The neighbors got involved and the police got involved. And guess what? They said, too bad, lady. We're prosecuting him. And it's not just feminists. It's prosecutors that know that the instinct in human beings to protect women is so great that they'll be seen as heroes for going after. If you go after and persecute a guy because he lost his temper one day, then you're going to end up in Belfort Bax called it mock heroics. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. There are things that mediators and therapists could do to help people resolve conflict if we could get them into that. And maybe the courts could be used to force people into say, look, you're going to have to take a look at your relationship, what's happening here, and get some qualified counseling. Of course, then you get into another problem with feminists, but that's for another day. But still, this idea that we just go in and arrest somebody and frequently take the breadwinner out of the home and lock them up in jail, then they lose their job. Then the kids don't have an income. I mean, this way
have a father
stuff is crazy. I would decriminalize all of it. And we do know when things cross a line. That's why we have aggravated charges on people who commit assault versus simple assault. When bones are broken, when serious damage is done, when weapons are used. We do have legal lines to draw between people. And while they're not perfect, it's a whole lot better than just a default position of finding somebody to arrest and somebody's life to destroy because a couple had a fight.
Yeah, I mean, this certainly in this case, we don't know what happened. To hit somebody over the head when he was sleeping, if indeed that's what happened with a lamp, sounds like it could have caused quite serious bodily harm. In this case, though, it didn't. So it makes me wonder whether, I don't know, can you accidentally hit somebody over the head with a lamp while he's sleeping? Well, I don't know. It sounds like they were both pretty drunk.
Yes,
he was hollering as he was led away, something about I was normal before I took up with her, hollering that at the neighbors. So perhaps what he reported to police about what happened was not actually what happened. He ended up with a very small scratch on his head, if the photographs that I've seen were correct. Photographs did circulate about a very bloody bed. It made it look like a pretty gruesome crime scene, but now it's understood that was her blood from a self-inflicted wound. It seems this cut on her
it was
wrist.
An accident. She accidentally broke a wine glass and it cut her wrist.
Yeah. So I mean, this was a sad, really messed up situation. Yeah, I don't know. That doesn't necessarily mean that she shouldn't be held to account, certainly for what she did, but it sounded like both were involved in a very drunk and messed up encounter, and that to prosecute her, I just don't see so much of domestic violence that we read about. It involves shoving and slapping, mutual kind of getting into it because you are drunk or you're at the end of a horrific argument or whatever, and locking people up and putting them through this doesn't seem a helpful way of dealing with it at all, whether it's a male perpetrator or a female perpetrator. And and
we've had 30 years of villainizing the men and victimizing the women, and it's getting old. For those of you who are younger, there was a day in the 1980s when domestic violence problems were pretty much handled by family therapists. And there was this big struggle between the feminists and the family therapists, and I guess it was the 80s, and the feminists won. And they pushed all the therapists and all the family therapists out of the arena of domestic violence and took it over with this crazy Duluth crap. And that's the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
And from
Yeah.
that point forward, and I know this because I watched it happen, from that point forward, family therapists started modifying their ideology in order to have access to this market. You saw them going hook, line, and sinker for Duluth style. They became born again feminists when the money started drying up.
And all of therapy did, you know.
Yep.
I mean, not all, but a vast majority.
Might as well be all.
Yeah, really. Yeah. You can't find a male-friendly therapist anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Another one of the consequences of this incident has been that something like 500,000, perhaps more people now have signed various petitions, one of them called Carolyn's Law, I think, very vaguely worded, but it was something to do with the media, you know, not becoming involved, not harassing, demeaning, you know, over publicizing these kinds of cases before they actually go to court. And, you know, here's another really interesting
what an
issue.
idea.
What an idea.
And would that apply to me too?
Well, that's the thing, you know, do they want this to apply to the Harvey Weinsteins of the world? Are we to protect him from, we've just learned that he's been convicted of some of those charges. I haven't read the details now. So, you know, or a Jeffrey Epstein, you know, I don't know actually, you know, I have, I'm kind of stuck on this one because I believe in freedom of expression and people being able to learn what's going on. But at the same time, we all know that especially with accusations of domestic violence and sexual harassment or sexual assault, the consequences are immediate and devastating, usually for men. So I think there should be some kind of shielding of the identities. I mean, I don't know how it could ever be done, really.
They shield the identities of alleged victims.
Just what I was going to say. Yeah, really. Why not the perpetrators?
That's true. Yeah,
the alleged perpetrators.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, until at least after the
conviction.
Conviction. Yeah.
If someone gets convicted, all bets are off. You know.
Tom, are you suggesting that people be treated as innocent until they're proven guilty?
Yeah.
Damn, I wouldn't admit to that, Paul.
Yeah, what kind of world do you
Pretty radical. Yeah.
It has become a radical idea. It's just unbelievable. It's like, what are people thinking? Believe the woman, believe the victim. This is like crazy talk. This is literally insane.
Yeah. And as William Collins' research shows, believe the woman leads directly to dead men.
Yes, exactly. Exactly right.
Yeah. No, but you know, I don't know. It is a radical proposal. Many of the Me Too cases, of course, do not involve criminal charges at all. They just involve women coming forward with various kinds of allegations and the you know, almost immediate destruction of the man's reputation and career as a result. You know, I don't know.
To get a conviction, they roll some expert in to tell you that women commonly have long-term relationships with their rapists.
Exactly.
That's really pretty normal reaction to being raped.
Translated, whatever these women did after they were, quote, raped, that's normal.
That's normal. So you can convict him.
Yeah, well, you know, we now have expert witnesses like this Barbara Ziv, who can claim on the witness stand with a straight face that there is not a single thing that a woman might do that could be used as evidence that she was not raped. So, you know, I get,
cannot
you know,
win. You cannot win against these people.
If people are willing to buy that, coupled with the, you know, as we say, the ever-present gynocentrism that sees women as without agency, then it's pretty bad news for men. I mean, I've been noticing this over the last year or so in cases where mothers kill their children, and how frequently the newspaper articles present the whole thing as a tragedy, including the, you know, and often the mother, well, in some cases she kills herself afterwards. In other cases she hasn't, but often, you know, the emphasis is on her victimization, whether she's alive or dead, what happened to her that brought her to this point, what might have been done to help her so that this wouldn't have happened. You know, in a kind of discourse that's never used when a man kills his partner and his children, or just his children. And just recently there was one at Christmas time, a woman who I think she jumped off a large parking garage in Boston with her 2 children.
Ooh.
And yeah, horrible, on Christmas Day, if I'm remembering correctly,
Merry Christmas.
or perhaps the day after. I'm not sure, but and all the reporting went out of its way to avoid saying what was obvious, that she either pushed or pulled her children off that building with her. Some witnesses were reported as saying they heard the screams of the children right before they were pulled or pushed off the building. And yet all of the articles talked about them falling from the building. They could not bring themselves to say that the mother had caused this to happen to her children. And that it was over and over again, the discourse was, this was a tragedy, a terrible tragedy for this family. The fact the father was the one left grieving it was almost not mentioned at all.
Geez.
So yeah, we are up against such very powerful cultural forces.
Yes, it's called.
There's another case right now in Australia where a man set his family afire in a car.
Horrible. Yeah.
But what's interesting after this tragedy, and these things are tragedies, and what's interesting though is that one of the police officials, liaisons to the public, that was having a press conference after that, said that they didn't know if this guy was just an enraged lunatic, if he was full of hate or what, or if he was a guy that had been pushed to the edge.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And of course, this guy, whatever the equivalent in Australia of Siberia there is, that's where they've sent him.
Immediately.
Pauline Hanson, a politician in Australia, comes out and says the same thing. And now she's under fire in the media. And it's like this mentality all across the board for domestic violence cases is that we're just not allowed, when the male is the perpetrator of anything, to start looking at what happened.
Right.
And if it's female's the perpetrator, we don't look there either. We just have to go with the narrative that she was mental health issues, some sort of problems for her, and if only the world could have understood, this tragedy could have been avoided. And with men, they flip the script, and then whatever it is, if men weren't such pigs, this tragedy could have been avoided. And that's what happens in every one of these cases.
Yes. If the woman is the perpetrator, everyone tries to find a way to make her into a victim.
Yep.
And it's obvious what's going on here. It's moral typecasting. And the work of Tanya Reynolds is instrumental in understanding how this works. And that is, generally, people see men as agentic and being able to take care of things. And when you see people in that way, guess what? You automatically give them less compassion and understanding. You know? And if women, quote, in general, are seen more as having what they call patiency or victim likelihood, you see them as deserving more compassion. And that's culture wide. You know, this moral typecasting thing is just kicking our butt, you know?
Yeah.
It's not helping us solve these problems. That's
no, it's not.
If anything, we're aggravating these problems instead of really addressing them.
Yep.
Well, sure, if you're a woman and you know that you can get away with all sorts of bad behavior by claiming to be a victim, that's got to have some effect on you. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out.
And that's why they can say Johnny Depp's wife said, no one will believe you. She knew that the culture was going, You
don't have to be a smart woman to figure that out.
No, you don't.
Little girls of 6 years old on the schoolyard already know it. I can hit you and you can't hit me back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Boy, there's a couple of times I really wish I could have decked her. You know, just one punch.
Talk about power and privilege.
Alice. Alice. What did he say? What did he say on the honeymooners?
Oh, to the moon.
To the moon, Alice.
Moon, Alice.
Straight to the moon, Alice.
Yeah. Mhm.
Oh God.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I can only hope, but I mean, it's a very thin hope that the Carolyn Flack case might, I mean, to wrench this back to that, maybe. I mean, I don't even believe that. I was going to say maybe there could be, some kind of productive discussion about what it means to be the accused, especially if you're a well-known accused whose name is just, dragged through the mud, and then you're on the receiving end of mockery and disdain and everything else. Maybe some of that might be applied to male accused too, but I just can't believe it. I can't believe that if that had been a male accused who killed himself, that there would now be all these tributes pouring in and all of the flowers and all sorts of people like Piers Morgan standing up and saying, what a tragedy it was. I can't see it, unfortunately.
Would have been different, no question.
One thing's for sure, because of this unusual story of a woman being the perpetrator and the woman committing suicide, which is so much out of the narrative, absolutely nothing will change.
What a positive message.
We always end on a positive note here.
We do indeed. All righty, well.
Oh God.
I guess we
I'll
should
just go away, at least with the understanding that we're all fucked.
But have a good day anyway. Oh.
Yeah.
Men
Are
good.
very good. We did it.
we did it.
You all take care.
Okay.
We'll see you.
Have a great week.
Bye bye.